I'm going to talk a little bit about the crazy nature of human beings, how you can hack psychology in a good way, and how if you give people access to feedback loops, magical things can happen. But I want to start by making us kind of come to terms with how irrational things like these make us, and sometimes how you can't predict it. So there's a big, heavy box phone upstairs, a little like this one. This, in 1983, hit the market, had celebrity endorsers, but people weren't always sure that mobile telephony was going to catch on. In fact, the biggest provider of mobile landlines in the world, AT&T, millions of miles of copper cable linking American homes, didn't know whether to invest in the mobile telephone or just to ignore it as a fad. And they called in the consultants, they called in McKinsey, and they said, could you give us an idea? It's now 1983. By the end of the 20th century, how many Americans will have these mobile telephone devices? And McKinsey goes and does its number crunching, comes back with a number, and they said, well, we think it could be fairly significant. We think almost 1 million mobile phones in America by the end of the century, which wasn't a bad guess, but it was slightly out. And there's 3 things McKinsey got wrong that I think we need to think about whenever we're thinking about a technology. First of all, it's not about the gigahertz or megabits. It's whether it actually connects you with the people you love, solves those problems. It's that entertainment system. It just is human. Secondly, Moore's law. It's not that big box anymore. It's this small, very portable, very powerful device. And that exponential curve continues. We haven't reached the limits of Moore's law. And thirdly, you need to frame your thinking in a very flexible way. And McKinsey were framing their thinking in a very fixed 1983 way. And social norms change. In 1983, if you wanted to make a phone call, you would go back to the office. You would go and find the public phone box. Today, if you take this away from a 15-year-old for more than 6 seconds, it's a human rights abuse. You'll be sent to The Hague. And I just want to kind of get you thinking a bit about, I'll talk about energy, but first of all, how any kind of device that hits that emotional connection is more than the megabits, the gigahertz. There was a question asked on the chat forum Reddit 2 years ago, that if somebody from the 1950s was to come back to Earth now, what would be the hardest thing to explain to them about modern life? And my favorite reaction was, I possess a device in my pocket capable of accessing the entirety of information known to man, and I use it to look at pictures of cats and get into arguments with strangers. And I want you to think about how irrational your own behavior is on these devices. We're now so addicted to our apps that there are apps just to tell you how many times a day you're checking your apps. There are new medical conditions. This is the 3-dot anxiety. New Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. And so what's happening here is happening to every part of our connected lives, which includes the way we consume energy at home. And I just want to give you one number slide to show how fundamentally behavior changes before you even realize. This is an analyst, Mary Meeker at Kleiner Perkins, looking at how many hours a day Americans spend with their digital devices. The top, the gray, is mobile. The blue in the middle is laptop, desktop. The kind of orange at the bottom is all sorts of other devices. But from 2008 to last year, they went from 2.7 hours to 5.6 hours a day just looking at these things. So that's doubling the amount of time. And that's time they're not spending talking to their colleagues, walking around, playing with their kids. That's time they're spent on here. So suddenly, everything has to go through these digital screens, and it becomes transformative. And the way we spend money on these screens is crazy as well. It's irrational. Kim, 2 years ago, issues a free game. You can live her lifestyle through iOS or Android. You don't have to pay money. You can pay a bit of money inside the game. In 5 months, this free game earned her $43 million. I don't understand economics, but this man I did a story about came to America as a refugee, age 16, from Ukraine. Was really frustrated at how expensive it was to phone his family back in Kiev. He was on welfare. Eventually gets into tech, comes up with a solution. You probably know how this story ends, that when WhatsApp had almost 500 million active monthly customers, Facebook buys it for what was then $19 billion. How much did Jan Koum spend to get those 500 million customers? How much did he spend on marketing, plus advertising, plus PR? A grand total of nothing. So we're in a world now where if you design a product that just works, that's simple, that solves a problem, your market does that. And it tears up the accepted norms of how you promote a product. Although when the BBC reported the sale to Facebook, it said it was because Mark Zuckerberg saw it as an incredibly valuable WhatsApp massaging service, which to me made more sense. So what does all this mean for energy, which is why we're here to talk about it? Because innovation is happening in energy at an incredibly fast rate. It's accelerating, and it's happening all over the world in ways that are going to affect how we consume, how we generate, how we pay for energy. And we're getting more control. More data is coming towards us as consumers. And we don't know how we're going to be accessing energy in 5 years, but we do know that we're likely to have a more central part in that network of consumption, production, sending back into the grid. And I'll give you a couple of examples of how fundamentally our assumptions about energy generation are changing.
In 2013, there was a 47% jump in the number of home solar installations in the country.
By the end of the year, more than 400,000 American homes had solar. Don Daler introduces us to one man who uses imagination to help energize the change.
New Jersey is one of the top 5 users of solar power in the country. One company, Solar City, says they're signing up new users in 14 states at the rate of 1 every 3 minutes. An impressive figure, especially when you consider Solar City's co-founder and CEO, Lyndon Rive, has absolutely zero experience in the power industry.
I'm a serial entrepreneur. This is my third company.
A serial entrepreneur.
It is. I started my first company at 17, then I started my second company when I was 22. Sold that to Dell Computers, and then started Solar City with my brother.
Rive.
So he doesn't come from the energy industry. He sold a computer company, but he had an idea, and that was, well, rather than charge people, as everybody else does, to install the solar panel, why don't we copy the mobile phone business and we'll sell them a contract? So each month they'll pay a fee, and at the same time they'll get to know how much they're saving by having the solar panel, so it's a much more attractive proposition. So it's entrepreneurs coming with a new way of looking at energy that are changing how quickly eco-friendlier forms of energy are becoming mainstream. And then think of the problems in the world that entrepreneurs are solving. What's the biggest problem we as a society face today? Well, it's obviously this not lasting till the evening because the battery goes, right? So this is a company I saw when I was in Israel recently. It's using nanotechnology to create a new kind of battery that stores energy in a much more quick way. This is their real-time demo of charging a battery from scratch in about 40 seconds. And they say, it's called Stored Up, the company. They say they can do car batteries, electric vehicle batteries, in about 5 minutes. And suddenly, this innovation coming from completely at the edges could just change things. Samsung has invested in this company. Elon, clearly, is changing the expectation. So in the States now, his power grid, his huge battery unit that he's pitching for households so that they can store battery, so they can choose when to be off-grid, and also it helps send power back to the grid. Again, it takes a few very bold individuals doing this, and suddenly it becomes a new norm. And I think the assumption at the moment that we are all consumers of electricity and we don't really have much control over what's happening as that electricity is getting to our house, I think we have to challenge that. It's going to change. More of us will be putting energy back into the grid at some stage soon. So we're in a world where everything becoming measurable. Smart devices everywhere. The Nest is just the beginning. It's partly that it's collecting data. Partly it's got algorithms that are learning when you're in the home what kind of temperature you've enjoyed before. Partly it's the dashboard. It makes it easy for that feedback loop to happen. But essentially, we're just starting to enter a world where there will be smart devices throughout our homes, throughout our offices. The taxi gets directions based on your online schedule. The sandwich shop knows you're coming near, knows your preference for the chicken and avocado sandwich, makes it before you get there. Probably more important, the smartphone warns you of an ex-girlfriend or boyfriend ahead so you can cross the road before you get there. So we're in a world of Internet of everything. There are Internet of Babies products being produced. If you're one of these neurotic parents that wants to know how warm your baby is wherever you are in the world on a business trip, the smart dummy, and then you can collect the data on your smartphone. There's the smart ankle monitor. This is the Sproutling. This is a serious product. I thought this is what we did to convicted criminals, but this is now, it's apparently responsible parenting. But everything is being connected. And then when you've got everything as data, you can nudge people's behavior in really interesting ways to try and optimize how they use services. Creating a little game has remarkable benefits. So this is a project that happened in Sweden. Audi sponsored it. Could you persuade people to do the more healthy thing of walking up the stairs rather than taking the escalators? So they became a bit playful. And I think it's going to be the same with smart meters. The more you create something fun, some reassuring feedback loop, you can get people to do things that they would think is difficult. It works. And we started to see this on, the dashboard of the Prius, this company O-Power that works with a lot of utilities companies, not just in the UK but around the world, shows you on a visible feedback loop how your energy consumption compares with neighbors. And there's very interesting social psychology. Alex Lasky, founder of this company, talks about what they discovered.
Graduate students put signs on every door in a neighborhood asking people to turn off their air conditioning and turn on their fans. 1/4 of the homes received a message that said, "Did you know you could save $54 a month this summer? Turn off your air conditioning, turn on your fans." Another group got an environmental message, and still a third group got a message about being good citizens, preventing blackouts. Most people guess that money-saving message worked best of all. In fact, none of these messages worked. They had zero impact on energy consumption. It was as if the grad students hadn't shown up at all. But there was a fourth message. And this message simply said, when surveyed, 77% of your neighbors said that they turn off their air conditioning and turn on their fans. Please join them, turn off your air conditioning and turn on your fans. And wouldn't you know it, they did. The people who received this message showed a marked decrease in energy consumption simply by being told what their neighbors were doing.
So we can be gamified. I'll just give you my favorite example of using psychology to create little scientific shortcuts, heuristics. You probably heard of that famous story about the obnoxious rock band that had in their contract rider a bowl of M&Ms and no brown ones, right? That was actually very clever social psychology. It was David Lee Roth of Van Halen, and this is the contract rider. But the reason was they had a really complicated set of tour requirements, very heavy equipment, huge speakers, huge amplifiers, and they knew that if the people setting it up in a concert hall in a small American city were not really careful, there could be an accident. And they wanted to check that they read all the requirements for setting it up. So they created a little shortcut. If they hadn't read it carefully, they wouldn't have known about the brown M&Ms. If they saw a bowl which had brown M&Ms, they wouldn't perform because they'd know it was dangerous. It's really quite a clever hack. So when you have a feedback loop like this, well, behavior changes for the better. In energy, there's lots of cool examples. This is a project in New York to show how your building's energy consumption compares with your neighbors. It leads, as Alex Lasky said, to behavior change. And we're still at the beginning of kind of improving our behavior based on what we're learning about our behavior. And we're also learning how to reframe, I guess, how we judge energy. In 1943, the B-17 was causing problems. A lot of pilots in America using the Flying Fortress were crashing. And there was a bit of a panic in American military circles. Was this because they were doing too long shifts? Were they overtired? Was there a problem? And it took an outsider to reframe the problem. this gentleman, Alphonse Japanis, when he was younger, he was about 25, he'd come from a psychology course, and he was asked to investigate. And he said, well, let's look at it in a different way. Let's look at every bit of the psychology of the pilots. And he went to the dashboard at the B-17, and he found the switch on the left for the flaps is very close to the switch for the landing gear. So maybe the pilot was pressing the wrong switch. So he got them to redesign it so one had kind of leather and the other had kind of soft fur. And that seemed to do the problem. So dashboards are really important in changing behavior. The Google Wave dashboard was awful. This is Google's intention about 7 years ago to reinvent email. It completely failed, because who can work on a dashboard like this? But a simplified smart meter that tells you what's going on in a human way, well, that can change behavior. And just think how simplified the experience is of some of the bigger winning tech companies. When you get out of this car, what do you do to pay? You don't do anything. You don't even need to touch your screen. It's creating a designed experience. Even when you sign up for Uber, you don't need to type in your credit card. You just photograph it. The machine does the rest. Because the data is there. And when you have data, this is BuzzFeed, how they monitor every story. A dashboard everybody has showing how it's been shared, what networks people have linked from. That's how they optimize traffic for each individual story. So I'm going to leave you with one thought, that innovation's going to keep happening. It's going to happen in energy the whole time, as well as in devices like this. And it's all to do with how you respond to this innovation. In 2007, the first version of this hit the market, the first iPhone. And the head of a big tech company, the big incumbent that was making smartphones, was asked on television whether he saw this as a threat. And this is what he said.
$500 fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine.
So I will ask, how did that work out, Bulmer of Microsoft? And next time, maybe you want to reframe your thinking, because human behavior changes maybe before the people in charge realize. Thank you for listening.